Good morning, Charlie, and thanks so much for taking time to be here. Before we get started, can you share a little bit with our listeners about your background and what led you to where you are today?
Ooh, I'll see how much I can capture in a small amount of time.
Totally. A few
It
sentences.
is. Well, so I have been involved in sexuality education since I was 19 years old. I started as a safer sex volunteer and I did outreach for my campus LGBT student group, although it was the LGB group for the first year because the T had not yet been added. So that gives you a sense of how long I've been doing this stuff. And I was a sex educator primarily for a long time. But about 10 years ago or so, when our book, The Ultimate Guide to Prostate Pleasure, came out, that was when I made the transition from sex education to sex coaching. So, working with individuals and couples to really figure out what they need to make their sex lives as fun and exciting as possible. And I think the big reason why I made that shift is because after spending so many years talking to groups of people and writing and blogging and approaching it from that angle, I was really drawn to the magic that can happen in a one-on-one situation because I can hear more of people's stories. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So you literally are the guy that wrote the book, The
Well,
Ultimate Guide to Prostate Pleasure. And I think that we're finally at a point where attention to the prostate is now more common and more of an open thing. Whereas in the past, the subject, at least in my area, was primarily a medical concern for aging men or a gay sex thing or a secret desire and experience that people hid away shamefully. It was like this thing that you would never share that you were interested in butt play. So the prostate is now proudly out in the open. And what led you to write the book?
well, I need to give credit where credit is due. My book partner, Aislinn Emerzian, it was her book project first. At the time, we were both working at Good Vibrations in the San Francisco Bay Area. Good Vibrations is the premier, clean, well lit, women friendly place to buy sex toys. And Aislinn's inspiration was that she was straightening up the shelves one day and in the G Spot toy section, there were 3 or 4 books that she was just putting around the toys for people who were interested in learning more about the G Spot. And then she moved about 6 or 7 feet over to the prostate toys, and she realized that there wasn't a single book
Oh,
with
wow.
about the prostate. There were anal sex books, but nothing about the prostate.
Mhm.
So she started writing it. And about 6 months into the project, she started talking with me about it and consulting with me about some of the information she was coming across. And after a little while, we realized that this book needed both of our voices because we decided that the book was going to be written for men and partners of men, that we needed to have a man, somebody who had partners who were men,
Right.
writing the book together so we could weave in all of the different perspectives. But yeah, it was her idea, and as soon as she said it to me, it was like a little light bulb moment. Why didn't I notice that? I've looked at this exact same wall more times than I can count, but it never occurred to me.
Awesome. Okay. So for those of us, like our listeners who are not aware of the potential benefits of prostate stimulation and prostate pleasure, can you share why looking into it might be a good idea?
Sure. So I should mention first that some of this information is speculative because it's not like there's a lot of research money going towards figuring out the medical benefits of prostate massage. So some of this is rooted more in uh, both sort of, I would say, common sense. It's not that common, unfortunately, but also from talking with medical professionals and getting their perspectives on
Mhm.
this. And there's a few factors. One of them is that for cisgender men, so men who were born identified as boys by their parents and the doctors and continue to identify as men growing up, cisgender men. Um, it's an unfortunate but grim reality that if you live long enough, your prostate is going to start acting up.
Mhm.
50% of men at the age of 50 have an enlarged prostate.
Mhm.
By the time we reach 80, those of us who do, that number climbs to 80%. So very easy to remember, 50-50, 80-80. An enlarged prostate is not inherently a problem, but it can be painful. It can cause difficulty with urination. It can just create like a bogged down feeling in your pelvis. Prostate massage alleviates those symptoms and does, in the short term, make it easier to urinate. And then, you need to massage on whatever schedule your body's on. So that's one reason.
That was actually gonna be one of the questions I asked you was if there were really benefits to prostate
Mhm.
massage or if it was just an excuse for butt play.
Yeah, no, there's definite benefits to it. I've
Yeah.
talked with many men who do prostate massage for medical reasons. They don't enjoy it. They don't dislike it. It's neutral for them,
Mhm.
but they do it because it makes their bodies feel better.
Right.
Um, Another benefit is that massage increases blood flow to whatever part of the body you're touching. And the increased blood flow is usually good for our bodies because, especially as we get older and blood flow decreases, the prostate in particular has what doctors call very low vascularity. That means that it has very low blood flow to that part of the body. So anything that we can do to increase the blood flow to the prostate just brings in oxygen, flushes out carbon dioxide and waste products, so they're not getting stuck in the tissue.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
so that's another benefit of it. A third one isn't precisely about the prostate, but it's about the muscles of the pelvic floor, which are directly beneath the prostate. It rests on the pelvic floor muscle.
Mhm.
And those muscles, for many of us, those muscles get overused, they get weakened. We're not very well designed to be sitting in chairs for 8 to 12 or 14 hours a day, like many of us are. And when those muscles get tight, it can cause hip pain, it can cause back pain, it can cause erection difficulties, it can cause a decrease in sexual responsiveness because the muscles can't relax to allow blood flow in the
Mhm.
thing. So anal relaxation and prostate massage can definitely help with some of those experiences. I can speak to that from personal experience
Mhm.
after a hip injury. And then the last one, and I always save this for last because it's the one I really like to highlight, which is that prostate massage opens up an entirely different realm of sexual pleasure. There's nothing wrong with penis focused pleasure. I love it. I'm not shaming anyone who likes it, but it's one flavor. There's a whole buffet table of other things that we can enjoy. And the wider our repertoires, the more fun we can have and the more easily we can adapt to challenging life circumstances. I'll give an example, a very common one for heterosexual couples as they get a little older, women going through menopause, maybe less interested in intercourse,
Mhm.
very an experience. Certainly, there's plenty of ways to pleasure somebody's penis other than intercourse. But let's just add another thing onto the possible menu, right? I've talked with a lot of men who have said that experimenting with prostate pleasure helped them see how they were limiting themselves to a very small slice of the buffet.
Yes.
And it helps them see that there's a lot of other stuff out there that can be exquisitely fun.
Would you say prostate orgasms feel different than penile orgasms for those who've never felt it before?
Yes, actually. And so one of the things that we did when we wrote the book is we sent out surveys and we interviewed a few hundred people, both men and partners of men. And one of the questions we asked was, how would you describe prostate orgasms? And what's interesting here is that the men used language that's very similar to the way that women talk about G spot orgasms. Maybe that's because the sensations are similar. Maybe it's because I heard a woman use this language and it's close enough, so I'll use it. It's hard to say. But the language that people use frequently is that prostate stimulation orgasms feel bigger, they feel more expansive, they feel more full bodied, they're more diffuse. Whereas penis orgasms, very similar to clitoral orgasms, are often described as being very focused, being very localized. There's like more intensity, but shorter duration. So you can think of a penis orgasm as like quick spike and then a drop. And a prostate orgasm is more like waves of sensation that could happen over a longer time frame.
That's what my clients have described as well, because I always ask them, especially when it's the first time. Like the first time they've experienced it, I'll ask how it was different for them and get that description because I'm curious as well.
Yeah,
I like to gather a lot of information from a lot of different people.
yeah. And what I find really interesting about that is even men who have never read or heard somebody else describing it in this language, they still use those words.
Yeah.
Right? So that takes away this possibility that it's like suggestibility because they heard somebody else say it. Yeah.
So what's the difference, like when it comes to massaging the prostate and experiencing things, what's the difference between pleasure massage and therapeutic massage? If you were going to get into doing something to yourself, let's say run out and grab a toy today, and you wanted to do it, one, just because you're curious about how good it felt, and then the other one would be, okay, I'm 50. I mean, my prostate's getting a little swollen. How would you use it for pleasure versus therapy?
I think that the pleasure techniques are very similar to the medical or therapy technique. I feel like this question you could also adapt to like, what's the difference when I massage my partner's shoulders because they have neck pain versus I just want to do something that feels good to you?
Right.
The techniques are very similar, but if I'm giving somebody a neck rub because they have a kink in their neck, they slept funny, right? I'm looking for the places that feel tension and I'm focusing there to try to get the tension to relax. And I don't want it to hurt, but it's not about it feeling good. It's about the relaxation of that spasmed muscle.
Mhm.
But if I'm giving somebody a massage for pleasure purposes, even if the moves that I'm doing are the same, it's not about finding the ouchy spot and working with it. It's about finding the yummy spot and working on it.
Okay.
The touch is probably a little softer. The touch is probably more about uh, where's the pleasure sensation?
Right.
And I think this is really relevant for men because a lot of us don't actually know how to tune into pleasure. For a lot of men, sex is about getting an erection, sticking it inside somebody or rubbing it forth a bunch of times, and then you have an ejaculation and then you're done. And it's almost like the goal is to be done, right? The goal is to get to the ejaculation. When we're doing something that's genuinely for the focus is on enjoying the ride. And so that this is a big difference. It's like if you're trying prostate massage for pleasure for the first time, focus on what feels good and explore that rather than rushing for a goal.
I
Uh,
love the way that you put that.
yeah, it's helpful. Well, one tip on that though, because it can be unusual to connect pleasure to a new activity. Prostate massage, first time spanking, first time, whatever it is. Um, Start by doing something you know you like, and then add in the new thing as a side dish.
Mhm.
So, for example, a lot of men, when they first experiment with prostate play, they need some kind of penis stimulation at the same time. So maybe their partner is massaging them. Maybe he's touching himself while his partner is focusing on his prostate. But connect the new thing to a familiar pleasure. Maybe over time, your body will decide that the new thing is pleasurable all on its own, but maybe you'll always need to combine the two. For me, for many years, I loved receiving anal and prostate touch, but I needed penis stimulation at the same time. And then someday, just randomly, that changed for me, not because I was trying to make it happen. Who knew?
That makes total sense. If you look at a woman's body as well, we don't we may like G-spot stimulation, but normally don't want somebody to just dive straight for the G-spot. Like to be warmed up first and aroused first. I find the best results from arousing the full body and the penis as well before going for the prostate.
Yeah. And that has a huge positive benefit for men because it gets us out of this frame of mind that says that sex is about sticking it in and moving back and forth really fast.
Yeah.
And just widens open the possibilities.
What is prostate milking exactly?
Ooh, so prostate milking is a technique that is designed particularly to like squeeze out as much fluid in the prostate as possible. What the prostate does from a reproductive perspective is during the arousal cycle, it engorges, fills up with fluid. And then during ejaculation, it squeezes that fluid out into the urethra and then the muscles pump it out. So almost all semen comes from the prostate and the seminal vesicles, which are two little glands that sit on top of the prostate. Sperm are less than 5% of the volume, which is why men who have had a vasectomy, their semen doesn't change. It's the same color, volume, texture, flavor as it was. So prostate milking is basically trying to wring out the sponge and get as much fluid out of the prostate as you can. A little hard to describe this on an audio, but I'll try to describe it for people. So the urethra, the tube, runs right through the center of the prostate, like the hole of a donut. So if you have your finger inserted into somebody and you can feel their prostate, and we can talk about what that feels like, but it's about the size of a plum. So if you're in the US, call it 1 to 1.5 inches. If you're somewhere that uses a much more reasonable system, call it 3 to 5 centimeters. And so what you're doing is massaging from the side, say the right side, to the center. You're wringing out half of the sponge into the tube. And then you wring out the left side of the sponge. So we're really only talking about a centimeter's worth of movement from the border to the center. So you wring out one side of the sponge, you wring out the other side of the sponge.
And by wring out, do you mean like go for what, like 30 seconds, 2 minutes?
Oh, that's a good question. I think you have to experiment, honestly. Some men can feel it, like I know on me, I can feel when the fluid has been squeezed out into the urethra because I can feel like the drop of fluid. And it feels almost like the start of urinating. Like you can feel that little bit of liquid in there. The way that you're going to know it's going to work, though, is after you've massaged from left to middle, from right to middle, is now you're going to massage straight down the prostate from top to bottom.
So
and you're toward the
inside. Okay.
Yeah, from the top of the prostate closer to the head, you're going to squeeze all of that fluid out into the urethra. And you're going to know it's working because there's going to be a sensation of fluid in there. And if you keep at it, there will be some clear fluid coming out the tip of the penis.
Does that work better if you support it from the other side? Like if you were to press up on the perineum? And then, so you've got your hand on one side, and then you've got your finger on the other side, and you're almost squeezing it a little bit. Would that work even better? I've never done that, actually.
You could try that. In the book, we referred to that as coming in through the back door and up the stairs at the same time.
Yeah, like I'm going to try that as soon as possible. I'll try it this week.
The other one you could try, and this would work on somebody who's maybe a little bit more slender, is if you put your palm, like a firm palm or firm pressure between the belly button and the pubic bone, because that's where the prostate is. So now you're like squeezing from one side and squeezing from the other side, sort of sandwiching the two.
Right. Okay.
And the reason why I say that might work on someone who's more slender is that somebody who's a bit more full through that part of the body, it's just more tissue to get pressure through. Massaging somebody when they're wearing a sweatshirt versus naked.
Yeah.
So definitely try it, but for bigger guys, that might not be as effective as skinnier guys.
So are there any danger in using, I know this is a little bit of a sideways question, but as far as we're getting into butt play and prostate play, is there any danger in using really big toys or fisting?
The answer is no and yes. So the no part is that the anus can actually expand far more than people realize. Back before they invented those little laparoscopic cameras and endoscopes and all of these little medical devices we have now, people would have surgery. They'd be sedated, anesthetized, and their anus could open up big enough to accommodate whatever the surgeon needed to insert because they were that relaxed and totally fine for them. If your body is comfortable with it and you know what you're doing, it's not a problem. The problem happens, or the risk happens, when we're trying to force ourselves to go larger than our bodies are ready for on that occasion. So maybe on one occasion I can take the big toy, but then the next time I can't, and I push myself to do it.
And is
Uh,
that a case of is that mental stress or mental resistance, or is that physical tissue resistance?
Actually, it's both. The mental emotional side, you know how when a dog or a cat gets scared and they tuck their tail under? Human beings do the same thing when we're scared or stressed out. We just don't have tails to make it visible. And yes, I know you can buy butt plugs with tails attached. That's not what I'm talking about. There's a reason why people who stress us out, we call them a pain in the ass. And people who are angry all the time, we call them tight asses. The pelvic floor literally tightens up when we're stressed. So, and that doesn't matter whether we're stressed because stuck in rush hour traffic and running late. I'm stressed because my boss handed me a project that due first thing in the morning, or I'm stressed because I'm worried that anal play is going to be painful. But the stress response is the same in the body wherever it comes from. And so anything that stresses you out can make your anus tighten up. My favorite technique for addressing that is take some long, slow, deep breaths together. It does not ever work to tell somebody to relax, like telling someone to calm down. Don't, because you're making it worse. But if you say to your partner, hey, like, I notice you're a little wound up tonight. Let's take a few deep breaths together. Two benefits there. One, I'm not telling you what to do. So that takes out. But the other benefit is I'm unwinding my system. You're feeling me. That helps you unwind your system. So that's the medical, or that's the emotional side of things. On the physical side, though, we spend so much time sitting. Terrible for our pelvic floors.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't even realize. About 6 months ago, I was doing some physical therapy because I had a knee pain that was actually coming from a tight hip muscle. And when I started strengthening my hip muscles, my pelvic floor relaxed.
Oh, interesting.
So,
Yes.
it is all connected. For those of you who want, I'm not going to get into the specifics, but if you're curious, yoga, child's pose, and happy baby pose are my two go-to starting places for learning to relax the pelvic floor. You can find plenty of yoga videos on the internet. Happy baby and child's pose.
Now, I'm the one who's on a tight schedule today, so we'll be wrapping this up soon, but I do want to ask you
Yeah.
if you could speak to reluctant partners of men who are interested in prostate play and prostate pleasure, but their partners are like, oh, ew, I don't want to go there, or I don't know, that's weird. What would you have to say either to the partners or to the men, like a way that they could speak to them and introduce the subject in a way that's not scary?
Yeah. Well, so when we wrote the book, we surveyed people. What were the things were barriers to you for doing this?
Mhm.
We heard three things come up over and over again for men and partners. Is this going to be painful, which can be addressed by proper technique? Is this going to get messy, which is about hygiene and cleanliness? And that's also a technique factor that you can take steps to mitigate potential risk. But the third one was, does this mean I'm gay? Does this make me less of a man? Am I taking on the woman's role? And we actually devoted a whole chapter in the book just to unpacking that one question, because both men and partners of men sometimes have emotions come up of like, oh, if you want to receive prostate play, does that mean you're still the big, strong man that I want to feel protected by? There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Um, Also, it's a novel kind of thing, right? Other than, well, for a lot of women, not all, certainly, but for a lot of heterosexual women, sex is something that happens to them, with the possible exception of giving
That's
blowjobs,
a great point.
right? So stepping into a more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not
Act
initiatory,
an
not,
active role.
yeah, but it's not even just active because you can actively receive too. I hope
Mm.
people are actively receiving, but like you're giving in this way, that can be a new role for folk. Seeing a man receiving penetration might bring up vulnerability. Like I'm seeing my boyfriend be really vulnerable here, and that feels scary to me. There's a lot of pieces to that. Um, I think the big thing with this is take it really slow. And when you notice emotions coming up, stop and take care of them. Don't push through. If you're noticing that, like, you're feeling like you're having to push yourself to do a thing sexually, listen to that resistance and stop and pay attention to it because there's something important there. One thing I have learned over the years is the more you force yourself to do something sexual that you don't really want to be doing, the more you're building up resentment, and resentment will shut down your sex life super fast. Uh, so really listen to that and talk to a professional, talk to a friend, talk to some people who do this, unpack whatever's going on for you there so that you can decide what to do.
That's
And
a
I get
really great point, and a very I love the way you put that. It was very compassionate, and I think it is really important if you don't like to do something and it's not being done to, if you don't like to give your partner something that they want to receive, then take a moment and take some space and examine what the problem is rather than just shutting it down as in, "Oh, I don't like that."
yeah. And let's acknowledge that sometimes it's because there's a squick.
Yeah.
There's a squick around men's vulnerability. There's a squick around anal play and coming into contact with poop. There's a squick around like, I don't know what I'm doing and I feel incompetent. I better not do this. So whatever's there, if you can identify it, maybe it'll change, or maybe you just need to accept that's how things are for you. But at least you are coming from that place of knowledge.
Right. All right, Charlie. I hope that we can continue this conversation very soon. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
It is a pleasure. It's really one of my favorite things to talk about, and especially with somebody who's so clearly enthusiastic about it. Super fun,
Oh, yeah.
right? Want to come back.
Thank you. And I'll talk to you very soon.